Hello, everyone. Just jumping on to the webinar. We'll give it just a couple more minutes and let people trickle in before we begin today. Awesome. We can kick it off here now. So hello, happy International Women's Day, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm Nicole Rathi, the Project Manager for AI for Manufacturing Canada. Today, we'll be speaking with some women shaping AI in Canada. We'll be joined by Jennifer LaPlante, Humera Malik, and Christy Michalak to discuss how to attract, retain, and promote women in AI. Jennifer is the Executive Director of DeepSense, an organization driving awareness and adoption of AI and machine learning in Canada's ocean sector. Her work has led her to be a collaborative and inclusive leader, which has enabled her to attract talent to the industry. Humera is the CEO of Canvas AI, a company focused on building AI software for the industrial sector. She is known internationally as one of the leading voices in AI and how it can propel growth, augment human expertise, and achieve sustainable goals. Christy is an engineer with global experience, both working for consulting and working for the world's top manufacturers. Today, she is a director at NGen Canada, where she is thrilled to work with companies across the country to help them solve some of the biggest challenges. We will have a question and answer period at the end of our session today. Feel free to drop your questions in the question and answer box below or ask them at the end of the session. Without further delay, I will pass it off to Jennifer to kick us off today.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone, and welcome, and thanks for joining us. I think the big thing that we're going to start talking about today is AI, what it is, and then, what the real challenges are associated with it. So when we think about what AI is, it's a bunch of data, and it's data that we're using a machine to learn from it. So we're getting a machine to learn and think how a human acts and engages and replicate human behavior. And one of the challenges that we see is that technology tends to be represented heavily and dominated by males. And that means that a lot of the behaviors that happen when we're thinking about creating some kind of AI or technology, it tends to emulate the beliefs and the systems of those who create it. And the other thing we have to think about is the data that gets collected and how we're actually training machine learning models and other types of solutions. That data might be collected by certain groups and certain parties that aren't necessarily thinking about the risks associated with the data. So I think the reason why we're having these conversations today is really because we're talking about what challenges do we have associated with talent, with types of models and AI solutions we can be creating, and with the data that we're collecting that can maybe cause some injustices to other people without really thinking it through. And I think the thing that's fascinating is the three of us are all coming from different backgrounds, but we're seeing that those challenges are agnostic of any industry and sector, and they're really a problem that we need to tackle head on.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. I will pass it off to Humera to kind of dive into her experience.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here today. And just building on what Jennifer just said, I come from a different sector, which is the industrial sector, and no surprises, industrial sector is heavily male dominated. And the most interesting trend in manufacturing, and especially in places like Canada, US, Japan, and Europe, with where there has been a heavy engagement with the manufacturing side, we're seeing an aging workforce that is retiring rapidly. And that's in certain countries, that's actually become a crisis at the moment. And this is really where AI provides an opportunity to capture that institutional knowledge, which the skilled labor has, and to take that knowledge and harness the younger and more diverse workforce that is now entering into the sector. But what we have found that the use of software like industrial AI software, it can certainly improve certain aspects of the operations in manufacturing. But a secondary impact, which we have noticed in most cases, which we all really care about, is the sustainability side, is how it can help reduce energy consumption, fuel consumption, carbon emission, reduction of carbon emission. And we're also seeing that this new workforce also really cares about that. So we're seeing really AI impact in many ways. Primary is obviously improving operation, and secondary has been on sustainability side. And as Jennifer touched on, when it comes to data, there's no lack of data in this particular industry or sector, but you can't remove the bias that exists in data everywhere. And this is really where you have to have AI play a role, which is more positive in a way where when you actually parse that data, you're contextualizing that data, you're able to also remove some of those existing biases. And one key thing about this has been is most of the things that we have seen being implemented from an industrial AI perspective, everything has been like a black box. And it's hard to understand why decisions are being made, but it's so critical for this industry to look at why something is happening, because just to put it in simple words, things can blow up in the industrial sector if you don't know really what is happening and why it's happening. And this is really where it's important that you actually look through the technology and look beyond the technology as well. It can also drive, as Jennifer touched on, is technology changes behaviors. And this is really where we're bringing in the next generation of the workforce that worked from a technology perspective, but also can take the institutional knowledge through the data to learn from it. And I think at the end is we're all talking about AI in many ways, but most recently we're talking about generative AI. And I think it's very important for it's very useful, obviously, very informational, and obviously very disruptive as well. But we also have to be very careful about is the impact of it, as somebody had said, is, you know, these are unknown dangerous problems that we're entering into, and unknown territories. And this should definitely make everybody pause and think about it before going for a wider adoption of it.
Yeah, thank you, Humera. I'm interested to see your perspectives there on biases, Christy, if you want to jump on.
Sure. Thanks, Nicole, and for pulling this panel together and inviting us, NGen. So I'm here representing Canada's Global Innovation Supercluster, where we have about 170 projects under the go, many of which include AI. So there's a lot of concrete examples of where we really have to think through what are we building today, and is it going to be able to be used in the future? If I can give you just a really concrete example of outside of our projects, I can't tell you too much about what we're actually executing, but my favorite example of the bias that we are building into products today is my daughter's robot dog that I bought for her for Christmas. So she looked forward to this robot dog for months. She asked for it. She finally unboxed it on Christmas Day, and this dog promised that it would roll over and it would fetch balls and it would interact with her. And she turned it on and couldn't get it to do anything. And it would not respond to anyone until my husband said, "Hey, Chip, go get that ball." You know, so it had been trained on models using men's voices and not taking into consideration the usage for the future and the actual true market for the product. So we translate that into manufacturing. We have a huge risk today of building these Lego building block pieces that we're going to take forward into the future, into our future designs, and building that into it. And so I'll give you a really concrete example from a factory. For let's say we have a welding factory and we want to keep people out of our expulsion area and keep people from getting hurt by welding. And we want to set up cameras. We have to make sure that those cameras are seeing every person that could potentially come into that area, right? And every person that looks different from other people. And here's an example that I really see a big risk is if one day we want to go forward and bring people with mobility devices into the factory. Have we considered that as an example? And have we built that into the model, or even the potential to build that into the model in the future? So those are where the decisions that we make today can so drastically impact the demographics that join our companies tomorrow.
For sure, and I completely agree with you. As well, just building on that, Jennifer, I know you have experience in kind of building the future of, you know, AI workforce and connecting with students and stuff like that. I would love to hear your insights on that topic.
Absolutely. So at DeepSense, we help companies understand and trial and adopt artificial intelligence. So we spend a lot of time educating people. And part of the conversations we have are around what kind of data do you have and how can we help you use that data for something? Going back to Humera's point, like we're trying to find how do we get resources for the future? So those jobs that no one wants to do, how do we make sure that we have people that can help train some kind of a solution or automate a process and do things so we continue to have sustainable businesses and grow as an economy? The problem we have sometimes first is trying to find those use cases. Organizations really struggle. And then when they do, they might find a really great opportunity, create some kind of technology solution. So this means you're changing a company. Well, we tend to have very male-dominated industries in the ocean sector, manufacturing, and others. And suddenly we're bringing on a new cohort of people. So let's say we do find some great women in tech and you bring them in, you're bringing them into an organization that has not had a lot of women working there before. So we definitely see these challenges where you suddenly are seeing a dynamic change in an office place where maybe behaviors and cultures were not typically diverse and were very stereotypical. And it's really hard sometimes to try to encourage increased diversity in tech teams. So we do see that challenge where trying to find talent and getting talent to want to stay in certain sectors can be tricky because they might be the first female that's worked somewhere. And sometimes that can be a badge of honor for some people, but we don't need to have that with many badges of honor. We need that there's a much more inclusion and it's not the first woman walking in the door and that's one of the bigger challenges we find when we're trying to find talent is trying to encourage some women who might be looking to walk down the road of a certain AI or tech career, that knowing that there still is a very limited scope of the number of women in that area, and they tend to be alone or not always have someone they can rely on.
For sure. And I just saw Humera hop off mute there. So if you want to build on that, go for it.
I was going to add some just really practical examples of what Jennifer just mentioned, because I've personally experienced it. You know, talk about the bias and forget AI for a second. Just going into plants and talk about the bias is when I was initially going into certain plants until this day, when you go into certain plants, and now I go with my own steel toe boots. But before that, in the early days when I didn't have my own and I would go into plants and you had to put on a fire suit if you're, going into some place where you had to put that on and you had to put your steel toe boots on. Everybody else had theirs and they couldn't have my size. They didn't have my size because there was no other woman in the facility. And then sometimes even, finding restrooms, like these are simple things, but you wouldn't actually have the facilities available for women to avail those. And so, I mean, we're in the 21st century, but the problems that you deal with in certain sectors, it feels like we haven't moved an inch from I don't know, 100 years ago. So those are some practical things that you got to see is so this is where if the data is being captured from these kind of places, then the data is already biased. And the data already knows the size, the way somebody reacts, the way somebody's acting, all that data is getting captured. So finding solutions are going to fit that problem. They're not going to fit a more of a generic problem. So I think we just got to be aware of all of that, and we got to be upfront with all of that, and then recognizing it, as we're building these kind of offerings and solutions related with AI. We got to take those into account and make that bias available in that data for it to recognize that.
I completely agree. And this leads me into my next question as well. And I'll kind of throw this to Christy over there. But when facing kind of these challenges, especially in industrial or manufacturing sectors, the challenge as well, not only attracting women, but retaining women in these roles. So do you want to speak to your experience kind of throughout that journey?
Sure, thanks, Nicole. And Humera, I loved your example of the PPE and having PPE available for women. And I do remember the days of trying to get my feet into men's work boots, and it just didn't work. And I'm not even going to go into wearing lab coats when you're pregnant and the impossibilities. Which I've also experienced. But so retaining women is also so crucial. I had someone just ask me yesterday, Christy, how do we connect to women? How do we get them interested in joining our sector? And the answer is they're here. they're here, they're going through engineering programs, they're graduating, they're interested, they want to be part of the future, they want to be part of designing the future, but then they don't stay. So why does that happen, right? And there's so many answers to that. So we did talk about PPE, we did talk about access to women's washrooms, which, by the way, I've also been in many places where I did not have access to a female washroom. So that's another piece. Really interesting study, though, came out this week, the tallest poppy syndrome study. And Jennifer shared that with us earlier, and thank you. And so I've read through it, and please take a look at it. If you haven't, we'll put it into a resource link in the chat, or sorry, we'll show you a screen later where to access this report. Sorry, but the implications for companies to think through, you know, how are we doing on our allyship for women? It's really important. And how are we doing on looking at, as women are growing and achieving in their careers, how are their interactions with others in the workforce? This is what this tall poppy syndrome piece is addressing. And are we supporting women so that they can go forward and continue to be successful as they move up, as they learn, and as they grow? So really important to take a look at that and think through, what are we doing proactively in our businesses to support?
One thing I'm going to jump in with that too, ICTC, which is a sector organization that's focused on technology, has a program, an ambassador program, and other programs around women and inclusivity and encouraging greater diversity in tech. And they had a kickoff for their ambassador program, and they brought up the studies around bro culture. And I think that's one other thing to think that very easily happens and excludes people. So you might be rewarding and incentivizing employees by going to a hockey game, going on a golf trip, doing prizes and gifts within an office. There's certain things that might tend to have skewed heavily towards male-dominated activity. You're the top salesperson on the team, so that means you get a chance to, we all go to Ireland and have a nice golf trip, and it's a, you know, you're growing the business, this is great. But maybe as a mother and, you know, I'm primarily the person that's at home and getting the kids to school and doing different things. And it's really hard for you to then say, I'm going to go and do this. Plus, it might not be an activity I'm even interested in. And I might not see this as an incentive and a reward. So I think, too, sometimes it's stepping back and thinking about how the entire workforce, it's not just your technology, the team culture of your day-to-day, it's incentives and how the team shows up and how they're all recognized for their contributions, really important too.
For sure. And I completely agree. And I think as well, moving forward, having, you know, a more holistic, like not gendered approach to it is something so crucial. Humera, I'm interested to hear your insights on this topic, you know, leading a company, being in the industrial sector. Do you face those challenges?
Oh, every day. As I said, some of them are simple, some of them are a little more complex. But just building on what I heard from Christy and Jennifer, I think one of the ways, because just let's focusing on the solutions into the solutions part. I think one of the ways which at least I have seen helps younger women to lean in is really seeing the examples of, hey, if I want to be somewhere, seeing that leadership in those kind of organizations, seeing others, that really gives them the confidence that I can go in. And we don't have too many of us. I mean, there's a handful of us, all of us here, and there's a handful of these women out there. So what we got to do is spread that as an effect, which starts to then get these younger women, as Christy was saying, there are many of them, they're all graduating, they're going through school, but how are they going to lean into these careers is only leading by example, is we get more of us. And that's what we should focus on, is how do we get more? Initially, you know, for early adoption phases, we need to make space for them, which is X% probably needs to be women in the leadership. Doesn't matter. Create that space in whatever way. People might not like it. Hey, why do we have to have that? We got to have it because we got to make this happen. So it's some enforcement which needs to happen. And that's the only way I feel we're going to see that change happen. And we got to do it, like really enforce this change. Otherwise, it's so slow. And by the time we see it happen, it would be like climate change. It's too late. What do we do now? right? Like, how do we catch up to it? So I think we got to recognize that there should be a sense of urgency around it. And this is really where measures need to be taken at every level, large corporations to small corporations. How many there, we talk about inclusivity and we leave it there. I think there needs to be a little more enforcement in the places so that we can see the change happen.
I totally agree with you there. And I was just going to pass it off to Jennifer, because I know through DeepSense, they've done some programming with, younger groups and school groups and stuff like that. And I'm curious to hear your insights about if you think that will help promote women in STEM and women and diversity in general.
So many things. I'm going to hop off of that last point because I think it's the same thing that you're seeing that are mandated in European countries where they're saying your board needs to represent X number of women. And then you have people come back and say, well, you're just going to throw someone in there as a token. Well, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And if you're not forcing someone to do something, you're not going to see change. So you absolutely need to set some kind of metric in place. And if there aren't metrics in place in terms of diversity, no one's going to force that look. You're not going to change your job descriptions. You're not going to start looking in different places for hiring. I know people who run companies that are hiring people and say, I don't understand women weren't applying to my jobs. Well, are you going out of your way to actually change how you're looking for recruiting? And the part around the few women, Ginny Rometty, who is the CEO and the president or the chairperson of the board for IBM, just came out with a book, and it's fascinating. She was on the podcast with Lex Fridman, and she was saying how she's come out with this book talking about what it's like to be a woman in technology and having had this extensive career and being one of the most powerful women in the world in tech, and how these men would say, oh, I wish I had a daughter so she could read it and read this book. And she's sitting there saying, but why can't you read my book? Why can't you get your son to read my book? Like, why do you suddenly see this as it's a gender thing because I'm a woman and I wrote a book? And it's that whole concept of what that diversity piece needs to be. And it's the same kind of idea. There's so few of us. So part of DeepSense, we've realized we need greater diversity and encouragement. So we created a mentorship program. Well, what ends up happening is you have the same women who keep getting tapped to say, can you be a mentor? Can you be a mentor? Because there's so few of them, they keep going back to the same people. And so it's taxing them. So all of these are great things. But I think one of the other things we have to remember is, there's not a lot of people out there. So we need to have advocates and supporters who might not be women, but are going out of their way to support women. It's not just women supporting women, it's everyone supporting women. And Christy's nodding her head, so I know she has something.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, Jennifer, absolutely. And thinking through also the business imperative to bring women on. And we know we have studies that show that the more women that come in, the more productive the company becomes, and the more we increase our top line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All kinds of statistics around this, but it's up to a point. And that point is the point where we become all women. Right. And then we need to start to also have diversity. We need to bring men back in. So it's like we need to have everybody. We need to have everyone involved in all of these decisions as we think through where we want to bring AI into our businesses and where we want to use that. The team has to be diverse to make these decisions, or we're just not going to win.
Completely agree with you there. And it's really an exciting time to be, I think, in tech, because these conversations are being had and are really, hopefully, some action is behind it. And on that note, I'd love to kind of hear from all of you on more so of the action being taken either within your organizations or within your kind of realm, or just industry action that you kind of see on the everyday. Humera, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So as I said, there is definitely awareness now. And what awareness leads to is some kind of an action. Some are slow in acting, some are taking the lead towards it. I think tech, I would say tech is at least at the forefront of taking some action. On the industrial sector, I think we have ways to go before we get closer to where tech is today. And so, I mean, in most of the meeting rooms, boardroom meetings, wherever I go, I find myself to be the learner. So that's really where I would personally like to implement that kind of a change. That's really where I was talking about that enforcement. Yes, and I agree with Jennifer. Everybody says, oh, this is like a token addition. No, it's not. You will still bring on, the kind of the person that you need. You won't just go in and settle for anybody. So I think that change is required, specifically in the sector, in the industrial sector, in the manufacturing sector, a lot more, because we don't have any shortage of skilled labor that's being produced. We have shortage of that skilled labor being matched into this sector. So I think there certainly needs to be some aggressiveness shown towards that. And as there's some changes that we're seeing, but nothing at the level as Jennifer talked about, some things that are happening at the core level where people have started to put mandates around. We don't have much of that, and we don't necessarily have awareness that these mandates need to be implemented either. So I would say this is really where work is required. I personally am trying to encourage, but as much as I can do, when we're in certain other industries, you would see a much bigger difference. But in this industry, I think we just need more of examples that can be set so that more younger women are encouraged to come in.
Completely agree with you there. And I think, people like yourself leading the charge, it is very inspiring to see that. Jennifer, I'm interested to hear your perspectives on that, and as well more in the ocean tech industry and that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think, nationally we have the 50-30 challenge. And I think every company should be embracing that and looking at what the government of Canada is trying to do, taking advantage of some of the tools and systems that are prepared and trying to help companies encourage diversity, continue to hire differently, think about different things they could be doing that would support the women in their organization and future recruitment. But in the ocean sector, there's incredible partners that run great programs. COVE, the Center for Ocean Ventures in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. There's COAST, the Ocean Supercluster has a workforce development team. There's a peer in Halifax as well, which is around the Port of Halifax. There's all of these groups that are collaborating with industry, and they're focused purely on workforce development. And I think there's a question that we'll probably get to this in the chat that's asking about this whole shift too, is part of it isn't just how do we find youth, how do we start getting younger women who are interested in grade 5, grade 8, the times when decisions are kind of made about certain systems and sectors and ideas. How do we chat with them then, but also how do you engage with them while they're in their post-secondary or high school education? And then the other most important part is career transition. We have incredible talent of people who'd be great in a new industry. They're just not familiar. So it's trying to create those opportunities for them. And I think there's a lot to be said for organizations that are working on workforce development, because they're hosting events, they're hosting training workshops, they're making things available at low cost or at times that are convenient to women. When we have to remember that, I remember when I was first really starting my career wanting to volunteer and be actively involved in community groups, but I had a young son and every event was from 5 to 7. And I had to pick a kid up from daycare, like a 9-month-old needs to be picked up, brought home, fed dinner and goes to bed, all within that 5 to 7 period. And it's that whole recognition is trying to do different things where we allow for the networking and involvement so that you don't end up having a men event and then a women event. Because what we end up doing is we modify and like, oh, okay, well, let's go try things that will allow women to come. Well, then it becomes a women only event. We want a broader ecosystem. And one thing we have learned too, so DeepSense, we work with students, we work with industry, we do a lot of hackathons and training sessions. And hackathons are inherently designed to, bring students together or other people together early in their career and try to solve an industry problem and meet new people and kind of maybe create their own startup. Well, we also found that, a weekend hackathon where you work 24/7 and you're sitting somewhere and working late at night is not a safe thing. Many women don't necessarily want to work until midnight, sitting in a dark room with a bunch of other people. And so we found that sometimes the things that we try to do that are for career development tend up being very exclusionary for some people too. So we've really tried to think about how do we create opportunities that allow an equal playing field for everyone. And we're not necessarily attracting only a certain dynamic or certain kind of person or a certain gender, and trying to make sure that we can find ways to engage and introduce as many people as possible to our sector.
Completely agree with you there. And I think that leads perfectly into asking Christy as well, more in the manufacturing, and as well, I know just with your work across Canada, what you kind of find there.
Yeah, so we have launched our Careers of the Future campaign. This came out about 18 months ago. And my background is a piece of that. So we filmed robots doing what robots do for about 2 hours and put it on TikTok, and drew in over 1 million visitors into TikTok to watch that, of kids that are just putting it on in the background and watching it while they do their homework. But overall, that campaign involved as well a bursary contest and a lot of networking with the schools and organizations where kids can get involved and really start to be exposed to this industry and think through, like, is this something where I see myself in the future? We were really, really pleased to have a 50-50 split between young boys and girls that were interested in this campaign, and many more young girls seeing themselves coming into manufacturing as a potential career choice in the future. So a lot of that was around the messaging of what they can come in and impact when they join. Manufacturing is one sector where we can change the world. We can address climate change. We can address sustainability. So many things can be made better through our industry. And if young girls want to come and be a part of that, this is the time to do it. So that messaging is really has really gotten out there and created a lot of excitement. On top of that, of course, we have our funding programs. So we have collaborative projects where we do offer funding, and check out our website if you're interested in taking on a technology project. But within those programs, we're looking for knowledge dissemination throughout the country. So not just for a couple of companies to come in and learn something new and commercialize, we want that knowledge to go out. So we've seen companies bring in, for example, academic institutions so that students can learn, and really looking for ways to get out to a more diverse and more broad audience the knowledge that we're creating inside the country. So that will go forward and continue as we move into our next round of funding. And I want to add as well, we are developing workforce development programs. And that's another opportunity where we can look specifically into underrepresented groups and how can we build bridges for these groups to come into manufacturing and then be successful when they get there.
For sure. And I think that really leads into a question we were asked by our participant is more technology recruitment. And I'll start it off mainly with the second question and then lead to the first one. But discussing more younger generation right now, do you have any kind of advice or, mindsets on how to attract that mid to senior level women who already have experience maybe coming into manufacturing? How would you kind of address, or attract women that aren't, just beginning their careers, but more later on, maybe making a career shift?
Okay, so I'm going to jump to the first thing that comes to my mind, and I'm sure I'll have some more really great answers to that. But Nicole, organizations like yours, AI for Manufacturing, if women are interested in getting involved in AI, that's a perfect place to come in and understand who are the companies that are doing AI in Canada and how do we get involved, right? It's a good lead. NGen as well, anyone can join NGen as a member and see our database of companies and see where they're geographically located. So you can start to picture, is this something that I can see myself coming into? And then of course, networking with organizations like ours to support that transition. How does that start to look? So that's the first thing that I think of, but I'll throw it to Jennifer and Humera as well.
So I think manufacturing and AI both, I would say, is one advantage for anybody in Canada is there's no shortage of AI companies. I mean, if you're looking at the tech sector, then there's definitely no shortage of the AI side. So looking through the NGen database as well as, AI for manufacturing and many other places, like you can look at all the accelerator programs as well, like, from Mars to DMZ and others as well. So there's no shortage of the tech side. AI in manufacturing as well, what you would find is that Canada has probably a very high percentage of different kinds of AI companies that are in the manufacturing sector. From a manufacturing sector perspective, this is just a great time to be in manufacturing because we have about 30 to 40% of there is an aging workforce, and manufacturers are desperate to get that replacement. And what comes with it is we've actually seen a customer of ours that has plants across the US and Canada advertise in their job listing about AI. Hey, come and work with AI in our sector. So you can see how they're trying to now attract talent, like, be it the early or the mid-level, is where you can come in and start. You don't necessarily have to start from, hey, you have got 50 years of experience in manufacturing, otherwise you can't touch this equipment. It's no more of that. So what they're looking for is that kind of a talent that has got some experience, but is willing to come in and upskill that so that they can work with the newest technologies as well. So it works both ways. It's if you have some talent and experience you can bring in, this is a great time to be in manufacturing, I would say, is because they are the ones who, there are more jobs, less people. And so I think Canada, just if you look at the sector from Detroit to Markham, like you look at that belt, you would find that we have hundreds of auto part manufacturers and others as well, like other manufacturing facilities. So there's no shortage, I think, of the opportunities. You just got to start to stay at it. One is just be persistent, right? Like just in any job, be persistent, but know what you're looking for. But if you have some experience, this is a great time to go after manufacturing jobs.
And I think on top of that too, it's the element of coming in from some other sector where you've had a chance to build a bit of knowledge and expertise. It's so beneficial because people, if you've been in one industry for a long time and somebody new comes in with a fresh set of eyes, you sometimes see things that somebody else didn't see, or you're bringing in a perspective of some other industry. It's kind of like a friend of mine used to say, one of the best things you could ever do is go to a conference that's outside of your own industry, because you're going to learn about so many other things that could end up being very important to you that are, somebody just hasn't adopted, or they're just concepts that you haven't thought of. So I think bringing in somebody net new can also be really valuable. It does go back to that whole element too of recruitment. Like part of it is incumbent upon people, if they're interested, to finding new things and going and seeking out information, but then also it's encouraging employers to think about seeking out skills in other sectors and not thinking steady state, like I need to look for that historical piece of someone who's been in manufacturing. Like we often have these conversations too in the ocean sector where it's around, people get afraid of that automation element, like I'm going to lose my job. And it goes back to the education of what we're trying to do is take away the worst part of every job. We're trying to take away the crappy things nobody wants to do, or the things that cause inherent risk. And we're trying to automate them and using artificial intelligence and other systems to make it better. And part of this really gets to the education piece of using AI for manufacturing and NGen as vehicles and systems to keep encouraging that message. So other people might hear, this sounds really neat and it's transformational. And I think, Humera, if we could just take those pieces you just talked about and blast them out to everyone, like you have so much potential in this area, it would be really, really great. Hopefully today helps.
For sure. And I think as well, I know we spoke to this earlier, but just knowing how to ask the right questions and using those critical thinking skills that are so needed in, AI in general, and applying it to maybe a career change or anything like that. But yes, in just the essence of time, if anybody does have any questions, we are happy to kind of open up the floor and see, if anybody is interested. Here we go. So yeah, just regarding a comment for AI for manufacturing. That's just asking where our list is, sorry. More information about AI for manufacturing will be available just at the end of this webinar. But to keep in the spirit of just International Women's Day, I'd love to talk about, key takeaways as well, more on that. I know attracting and retaining, but as well, more that critical thinking piece of, looking outside of your realm and knowing, I know asking the right questions right now is such a huge part of ChatGPT and everything like that. So I'd love to hear kind of all of your perspectives kind of on that realm. Jennifer, I see you smiling over there.
I think one of the things that's most fascinating about this is I've been in the world of AI for many years, and specifically that was my primary role for the past 4. And I know that AI is important when my husband comes home talking about it. And he came home talking about ChatGPT one day. And I thought, oh, okay, so now this is like mainstream for somebody who's not in that sector. And my kids talk about it. My kids have talked about how great it's going to be because they think it's going to make homework a lot easier. And so I think suddenly now we have a couple of things at play that have expedited the challenges we've had as an industry of AI. we've talked about bias and we've talked about risk and we've talked about whatever. Now that kids, for example, are thinking about using ChatGPT, but are being shown, this is showing you information that's actually not true. You need to actually question the content that's coming out of here. Like my kids have tried to break it. So it's one of those things where it might be helping us kind of advance that perception and how it all functions. And hopefully too, we're going to start increasing awareness of and exposure to. So I think the other thing as an industry that we've struggled with is there's so much potential to create systems that can make us more efficient and effective as an overall manufacturing country, that now people who might not have necessarily thought of AI are going to start asking questions about how this can help them. So I think one of the nice things that we are in this interesting phase of the world, as we go back to the conversation today about AI, is that I think things like ChatGPT, although they're going to definitely cause some challenges and risks to us as a society in general, have started expediting the dialogue about what AI is.
For sure. And I see Humera just jumped off mute. So if you want to as well contribute.
I totally agree with what Jennifer said about the vast adoption of generative and conversational AI and how it's happening. And I was thinking earlier as well as one thing that I would say it has done, even though I agree with all the risks that are associated, one thing it has done, it has removed the bias of some kind of an online tech from the minds of the people that are using it. And how I saw that is usually when you look at gaming and other technologies, it's usually where you would always see male dominance in those areas. ChatGPT, on the other hand, there is none of that. Like I am seeing around me, everybody adopted, everybody's on it. People that were, girls that were not into gaming or whatever, they are equal adopters. So it's an equal adoption method for the male and the female side. And that's the difference that I see between other technologies that we have seen versus these kind of generative and conversational technologies where there is no bias from adoption. Like I can't begin to tell you how surprised I was from the adoption that I'm seeing in certain folks, which are, people that don't even interact outside of Facebook and some sort of social media. They are interacting with it, and the prompts I got, like it just spins your head, right? Like it gets you thinking. So I think as you can say, I'm a big proponent of it. Like I support it, but I'm very well aware of the risk associated as well. But I would say this is really where you got to see how can technology remove that bias from the minds of people that are adopting it, right? Because usually you would see parents put boys in a certain side of STEM. Hey, you go towards robotics, and the girls end up going towards creative. Why that bias exists? But ChatGPT or things like this that are coming in, no more bias now. I've seen girls that are now writing code through ChatGPT on things that they wanted to do, really, and that wasn't there before. So I think this is a great way and a learning that we need to take away for because we're talking about the International Women's Day. How do we actually get more adoption of technologies and things like AI? I think this I've seen sort of has certainly gone for a place where we have never seen technology go, removing that upfront bias.
And I'd love to add to that. So, and picking up on Jen's point as well, that, AI is a little bit scary, and we've been scared of robots for a long time. Robots were nowhere near as scary as AI is. So this is a whole new world. But I'm also looking at AI as a great equalizer and a great opportunity for women, especially because as AI takes over those more traditional roles, looking at spreadsheets and pouring through data analysis and numbers, it's opening up the opportunity for people to come in and use their creativity. AI will never match us on creativity, or I guess that jury's still out, but it's a long way away. And it certainly won't match us in terms of collaboration, building relationships, working together to come up with solutions. So these skill sets that more traditionally we associate with women, or that women develop and thrive on, especially coming from outside industries and having different points of view and bringing that in, is really an opportunity that's going to be unlocked as we continue to adopt AI. So I'm really excited about the future.
For sure. And I think that's very much so a big part of the industry right now, is that adoption and the acceleration, which is really, truly exciting to see. Turning to the questions we have here, there's one about negotiating stock options for tech companies. And so potential synergies between you guys and how to build kind of negotiation skills, and then as well build wealth for women through stock options. I'm curious if any of you have any advice for someone early on in their career, kind of thinking about the future more so, having those, always awkward conversations, if you will, with potentially, a senior man or something like that, and addressing those. I'll turn it to you, Christy.
I'm just loving that I'm loving that someone put that question in the chat, because yay, we're thinking about negotiating our contracts and and asking for what we are worth. So that's wonderful. I don't have any specific advice for stock options though, other than
just
go for it. That's awesome.
Awesome. Humera, do you have any advice for?
My first advice would be, don't rely on AI for that, really. This is really where AI gets into that risky territory. So, but the other is, one thing I would say is where companies are making that open about, what the range of salaries is when they're doing job postings. These are the kind of things that tell you that they are inclusive, and that you would not be negotiated down just because you're from a certain gender. So I think this is really where I would encourage, when you're looking for those kind of things of inclusiveness in companies, it's very important to look at those things, is how open and transparent they are with those kind of things. And this is a huge area of interest for me, is how to help women negotiate. It's because I think we're more about, hey, let's just accept it and being compliant or whatever. It's just complacent. It's not that. You can negotiate. You have the power to negotiate. When you're sitting on the other side, you have the power to negotiate. So I highly encourage that every time when you're going in for anything, it's doing your research. If they're not open, then ask them, what is the range? And what the current people in that role are being picked. Just be open with that line of questions. Because I don't actually see women asking a lot of questions when it comes to compensation. We're just not very comfortable. And I think this is really where you have to start taking the charge of what is my worth, what is my value, and then start looking at these things. If somebody's not being transparent about it, then you don't want to necessarily be in that place. From an investment perspective, like, just not that we're financial advisors here, but you got to start having those conversations early on in your careers with the kids as well, to talk about those things. And I think there are many sources of it. just be careful about the AI sources of it where you're going to invest.
And I think one thing on top of that is, remember, increases come when you go in somewhere. So negotiating that first role, because once you're inside, it's a lot harder to get bigger bumps sometimes, depending on what you're doing. So even if you jump levels in different roles, you don't always know, and push for a little bit more. You have leverage with that first introduction. And one other thing to that point too, I think, is around compensation. I know people who worked for startups who've been given shares in lieu of a lot of salary, only for the startups to not be successful. And so there's knowing the risk that you're taking on. And then the last one is, I know people, sorry about lots of noise out there. I know lots of people who've worked for different companies that are publicly traded, and they have opportunity for equity in the organizations, and that shares get vested. And as knowing what risk you're taking, but sometimes it's free money. If the shares are going to continue to appreciate or unlikely to decline, if someone's going to match your investment of you buying equity of the company, you're contributing to its success, it could be worth it. So I think sometimes taking that full picture of how you can get compensated is amazing. We don't talk about full compensation packages very often.
Completely agree with you. And I think as well, to add, as using your mentors, using the people around you to bounce things off. And I think as I'm earlier on in my career, talking to other females in going into roles and being like, what is an expected salary? What is an expected share option is so beneficial, because then you actually know what other companies are doing that you're not exposed to as well. But yeah, turning to another question here. Previously, we're chatting about leadership and how we should be enforced. What do you guys suggest for young women who are starting to build their career, be prepared and ready to be at this stage of, maybe transitioning to leadership, or looking to be a leader down the line, say 10 years, 15 years down the line? I'll turn it to you, Humera, if you have any advice.
What I would suggest, just from my own personal experience, I would say is it's not necessarily always about titles and those kind of things. It's actually having a career roadmap. We go into jobs and we're constantly building roadmaps. It's having a career roadmap, where you are and where you want to be. And knowing that would help you then steer you in that direction, and always have that North Star in front of you of where you want to be. Because if you're going in a place where you want to learn, and then the next thing you want to do is start something of your own, then the next thing you want to do, you want to be financially independent so that you're not relying on any of those things, have that roadmap. Because you can do it once you have that roadmap. But if you're going in, you're trying to steer the ship as however the weather goes and the water goes, it's very hard then. So I always suggest that when you're starting in your career, be very thoughtful about it. Is why. The famous thing about Simon Sinek always coming out with the why. It's always have that why I'm taking this job. Sometimes it's necessary for you at that time, but is that helping you get to the next milestone in your roadmap and the next milestone? So be very aware of building a roadmap for your career, because we do it for other things, right? So and everybody wants to be financially independent at some point, or maybe you don't, maybe you want to do something else. But anyways, I think this is really where you take charge of your career and build a roadmap around it, not be distracted by, I want that title or this title, because what I've recognized, at least in my career, those things don't matter. What matters is having that North Star and working towards that North Star is more important.
Completely agree there. And yeah, I'll pass it to you, Christy.
Yes, I agree as well. And I would add, use tools like LinkedIn. So when you're looking at your LinkedIn profile, make sure you're branding yourself, not your company. Talk about who you are, talk about where you want to go, and then never be afraid to reach out to other women to ask them about their roles, ask what they're liking about what they do, what they would change about what they do. Women are interested in helping other women, and we do that frequently. So I would always encourage looking for those mentors.
Awesome. And then lastly, Jennifer, do you have any last key advice for that?
Yeah, I think also, if knowing what you're asking for, I do get a lot of people who reach out to me just generically, but I don't always know what you're looking for. So I don't know, do I talk to you? How much time is this? Is there something specific? And so if there's a very specific ask, if somebody reaches out and says, hi, I saw something and I wanted to ask your advice on negotiating something, great. Or I saw that you know this person and I'm interviewing for a job at this company. Would you be able to give me some suggestions of what they might be looking for an employee? Like finding those specific things, because you just need that little connection. It's kind of like when you're sitting next to someone on a plane and all of a sudden you realize you've read the same book and it turns into a great conversation. You need to find that little connection point. So spur that by giving them a little bit of a for them to know why you want to connect with them. And reaching out to women who have had some experiences, very likely to reach back to you or connect back with you, because there's some motivation for them to see that they can support you, help you, help benefit overall.
For sure. And I think, honestly, that's a great way to end today's session, is really just leaning on your network and your community. I'm just going to throw some recommendations up on the slide as well for everyone, and pop them in the chat here. But we just wanted to give you guys some really tangible things to look into. These are great books. And as well as Christy and Jen had mentioned, the Tallest Poppy study is right here. And so we really encourage you guys to all, take the action into your hands and into your steps into your career, and really, lean on your community, use your network, and, build confidence in that space. It's only really going to propel you forward into those leadership roles, if that's what you're after, or into the right spot for your career. And with that, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicole.
Thank you guys. We'll end it here.